Welcome to today's session on sourcing for apparel exports. This is session 8 and the name of the subject is export merchandising and EXIM documentation. Broadly, we are going to talk about the meaning and definition of sourcing, sourcing processes, sourcing options, which is offshore sourcing versus domestic sourcing, and then at the end, we're going to talk about the factors affecting sourcing decisions. Now, before we go ahead with the subsequent slides, it is important over here to understand that there's a difference between sourcing and purchasing. Now, the process of placing the order and getting the goods and making the payment is part of purchasing. But sourcing is broadly about looking at the markets, looking at your needs, trying to figure out who are the best suited vendors who can supply a particular material to you, and which vendor would be the best for a given particular situation. This entire thought process, which leads us to the decision as to which vendor are we going to buy from, all of this is part of sourcing. The act of purchasing something and then making payment for that is procurement or purchasing. So with that broad understanding of the difference between sourcing and purchasing, we will go ahead and we are going to look at the meaning and definition of sourcing. Now, what is sourcing? It is the process of identifying, selecting and developing suppliers. It is a key purchasing activity, and sourcing can be either at tactical, operational or strategic level. Now, it's a process of identifying and selecting the vendors, and then you start placing the orders. But over a period of time, you also tend to strike an equilibrium with the vendor. And over a period of time, you tend to give feedback to the vendor, help the vendor to develop such capabilities which is as per your need. So this process of converting a supplier into somebody who can give you better service, better products, better quality, better deliveries is the part of developing the supplier. So initially when you're buying from a supplier, that supplier is able to maybe supply one category of products to you. Over a period of time, when that supplier sees the different requirements that you have, that vendor or that supplier may add more machines, more different machines, so that he or she is able to take care of your other requirements also. So in this process, this supplier is developing himself or herself to fulfill your needs better. And if you look at the last line on slide number 4, sourcing can be either at tactical, operational or strategic level. Now, tactical or operational level is at the low level, at low level in the sense that it is at the production level, and it is on a daily or a weekly basis. Strategic level is high level. Now, operational level is where a person has to decide where to buy from in India, because next week we might fall short of maybe elastics or buttons or zippers or something like that. So you're planning on a weekly basis or on a daily basis. So the decisions which are being made in short term is tactical or operational. And at strategic level, the decision related to sourcing is where the top management has to decide, are we going to buy from India or will we source it from China? Now, this is long term, and this is at a strategic level, and this is where the top management will be involved. Top management is not involved when you are talking about purchasing different raw materials on a weekly basis or on a daily basis. But making decision that are we going to buy from outside of India or we are going to buy it from within India is something which has to be decided for the long term and by the top management. And once the decision has been made, it will be honored by all the departments in a company. Slide number 5. Traditionally, the role of procurement has been to achieve the cheapest price and ensure a smooth flow of materials to production. So, about 3 decades back, the purchase department had just one agenda: cheap and best. Meaning to say, buy any product or any raw material at the cheapest possible price, and also ensure at the same time smooth flow of material. Ensure that the materials reach the factory on time so that the production does not get hampered. That was it. But today, if you look at the role of procurement, it is very proactive. Proactive in the design and management of networks of vendors. Now, when we're saying design and management of networks of vendors, so we're looking at the designing of these network of vendors and management of these network of vendors. So, in case you look at Hero Honda, which makes motorcycles, they use 20,000 different components. Now, in their case, they have to build the network of vendors. So they have to design the network of vendors and then they have to manage it. So designing is as per the requirement of the organization. You design a particular network of vendors. Now, once this design has been made, then you start procuring from these vendors. And while you are procuring from these vendors, you have to manage this network because you have to place the order, follow up with them, get the deliveries, check the deliveries, evaluate it for quantity, quality, delivery and other parameters, and then make the payment to the vendors. And all the while also do a performance analysis of the vendors. And based on that, next year you may change the vendor base. So that is part of management of networks of vendors. We go to slide number 6. Now, what is sourcing? Now, sourcing involves inter-organizational relationships. One company is buying from or sourcing from another company or various companies. So it is highly dependent on the relationship between the buying organization and the supplying organization. And better the relationship, better would be the performance. Performance would be in terms of the quality, quantity, delivery, consistency, and things like that. Sourcing involves utilization of the resources of suppliers. Now, if you have a good sourcing strategy, you will be using the resources of the suppliers. Now, the suppliers have their factories, their manufacturing capacities. Let's say there are some manufacturers who are manufacturing elastics for you. Now, if you pay a visit to the supplier's factory and then see that what are the possibilities. Can they give you printed elastics? Can they give you woven, or can they give you some other structure elastics? If they can, you can use the resources. And whatever new products that could be made from elastics, you can send those developments to your client. If the client likes it, they'll place the order. So because of the resources of the suppliers, you will be able to give more variety to your client in terms of elastics. So that could come handy. The same follows for zippers or the button suppliers or the fabric suppliers or the dyeing or printing mill. You should look at the resources and use their resources optimally to get more orders. You get more orders, you are able to place more orders with your vendors. Vendor is happy. Your buyer is also happy. And if you are able to do greater business, your company is also happy. Sourcing also involves vendor development. Like we discussed that over a period of time, you develop the vendor as per your requirement. If you do not develop the vendor as per your requirement, you will not be able to improve your strength as a manufacturer. Your strength is to manufacture, but manufacturing would require different raw materials. Now, who's going to give you a much better raw material? Your vendors. If your vendor is not developing, they will not be giving you much better products with advent of time. They'll be giving you same traditional products, raw materials. And if you do not come up with new features, new characteristics, new attributes in the raw materials, you'll not be able to come up with new products. And if you don't come up with new products, the company would be dead, because you will not be able to give latest products to your clients. That's why it's important to develop the vendors. And then, of course, the cost management. At any given point of time, any factory tries to keep the costs as less as possible, but not necessarily the least. We don't want to bring down the cost to the lowest level at the cost of compromising with quality or with delivery or with any other important parameter. So it is not necessary that the lowest cost would mean the best option. Sometimes, most of the times, you place orders with such vendors who don't really give you the least cost. They give you a reasonable cost, and you place the order with them because you know that this particular vendor will give you a great quality and will deliver on time. The smaller vendors may promise you very low cost, and once the order has been placed, it may happen that they're not able to do the delivery on time, they're not able to maintain the quality and things like that. So as a factory, you should never ever rely purely on cost. So that's why we say cost management. We don't talk about just cost reduction, because cost reduction in itself may lead to disasters. And sourcing also involves supply chain management. At the end of the day, sourcing also means, if I want one piece today, if I want 100 pieces every day, if I want 100 pieces today of red and 150 pieces of white tomorrow and things like that, the vendor should be able to supply this supply as per your requirement accordingly. If you want it within 1 week, they should be able to send it to you in 1 week. If you want very low quantity, they still should be able to deliver to you. If a vendor says that you have to give me a truckload of order, you have to give me an order of at least 5,000 pieces, only then I'll make it and I'll send it to you immediately. Otherwise, I'll make it, I'll keep it, and whenever the transport guy is able to fill the entire truck, only then he will deliver. So in that case, the deliveries would be a little late, and that would lead to delay in the production dates in your factory. So supply chain management itself is a big nightmare, and only the best of the vendors along with the transporting companies would be able to give you the right kind of service that is required. And the most difficult thing to do is to get deliveries of very low quantities and maybe on daily basis. That is one of those most important, most difficult challenges faced by the supply chain organizations. We go to slide number 7. Now, what is global sourcing? Now, we've talked about sourcing. Domestic sourcing, you're sourcing in from vendors within India itself. It is a challenge, but then it's not a nightmare. But if you compare it with global sourcing, then domestic sourcing is very, very simple, relatively, so to speak. And you're able to manage things because everything is happening in India. But if you're sourcing from the entire globe, then things are not in your control. The person who is supplying to you belongs to another country, and the law over there is different from the law that exists in India. And you cannot control people who are not in India. I mean, you don't have that kind of control because they are different nationalities. So that's why global sourcing is a tricky business. And global sourcing is also known as low-cost sourcing or offshoring. Offshoring as in beyond your shores. And the key deliverables of global sourcing is low costs. That is one. Proximity to markets. it should be close to your markets, and whatever decisions you make in terms of global sourcing, you want to increase your profits in the long run. So the key deliverables are low cost, proximity to markets, and increased profits. And for companies who are interested in global sourcing, the world is their oyster. People like HLL or most of these Fortune 500 companies, for them this entire world is like an oyster, and they would buy anything from anywhere, and their information or the knowledge system is so fine-tuned that at any given point of time they know what raw material is available at what price and with what deliveries, and accordingly they make their decisions and are able to buy at the best prices with best deliveries, and thereby they are able to cut down their costs and therefore improve their margins. So that's the advantage of scaling up to the global levels. And that's why the global companies are far more profitable than the local companies. Now there's a flat map of the world in slide number 8, and what we see here is I have marked it certain regions. Now we have Central and Eastern Europe, we have Central and Latin America, we have India, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and we have Southeast Asia. Now these are all such regions which are the major apparel manufacturing and exporting regions. So, India, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, then we have Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and then we have countries in Africa, but not so many. Then we have countries in South America, and then we have Mexico and few of these countries in in Central America, the Caribbeans, which are into manufacturing. And there's a fair amount of manufacturing still happening in Central and Eastern Europe, Portugal and Spain and Germany and France. They're still doing a lot of garment production and exporting. And again, one of the major countries in the easternmost Europe is Turkey, which is one of the major manufacturers of garments and supplying to the Western Europe. So we can see that because of the outsourcing boom, the telecom boom, internet and search engines, and the reduction of information asymmetry, people know what is available where at what price, and you can communicate with people for a fraction of cost. The supply chain has become very, very competitive, and it has become truly global, so to speak. So when the world becomes very, very competitive, it's a double-edged sword. You can buy at very cheap prices. That's the great part. But the worry or the danger part is that others also can buy at very low prices, and therefore they would be able to produce at very low prices, and they're going to compete with you. So it's a double-edged sword. But for customers, it's great because customers get great varieties at the least of prices. That's great for customers. Good competition in the market is good for customers. We go to slide number 9. The major apparel brands in the world, mostly from Europe and USA, they can choose to buy from many countries like India, China, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, South Africa, Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, Brazil, and Mexico. Now, these are some of the major countries, and other countries also are there in Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe who are still into manufacturing of garments, including countries like Italy. And the advantages of global sourcing is the labor costs. If you are into global sourcing, you will be able to bring down the following cost. You'll be able to bring down labor cost. You'll be able to bring down the machinery and tools cost, land. You can lease land or you can rent land. such countries where it is practically free, or it is being provided by the government along with some incentives. You can buy the components at very low prices, the raw materials, energy and other utilities at very low prices, purely because you are operating at a global scale. And moreover, there are a lot of governments which offer incentives such as tax breaks and duties. So most of these underdeveloped countries or developing countries, they invite manufacturers, the global manufacturers, to their country, and they say that we will give you free land and we'll give you the best of services in terms of factors of production, land, labor, capital. We'll ensure that you do not have any problem in terms of manufacturing. Why don't you manufacture in our country, which is going to help in adding to our exports and of course generate a lot of employment for the local people. So those are the advantages of global sourcing. Now, why sourcing? Why are we even talking about this? Now, it is a critical point of discussion because in the face of tremendous downward pressure on prices, now please understand that there is continuous downward pressure on the prices. There is, if you are a manufacturer, you realize is that with every passing day, there is a requirement that you bring down the prices further. How do you bring down the prices? How do you reduce your cost continuously? So most of the manufacturers see that they have already exhausted all the traditional ways of reducing the cost. So one of the last resort is low cost sourcing strategies. So that's why it's important. You have tried to be very, very efficient and very, very productive and so many things. Now, despite all of that, there is still a requirement to further reduce the cost. What else do you do now? So you resort to low cost sourcing. Now you have to buy the raw materials at the best possible prices from the entire world. Hunt, look for such places, regions, or such suppliers who can give you much better prices than your existing prices. And if figures were to go by, in fact, most companies have experienced 10% to 35% cost savings by sourcing from low-cost country suppliers. So that's why it becomes very, very important today to spend some time on sourcing strategy. And if you look at these strategies of iPhone, or people who make electronic products, or who sell garments, why do they buy from China or India or other places? Why every cell phone company they get their products manufactured from China? Because China makes at the lowest price. So it is almost all the companies in the world, they have to, they're forced to buy from China, because to exist you have to buy at the lowest price so that you are still able to make a healthy profit. So that's why sourcing is very, very important. Now, what are the sourcing objectives? Fairly simple. Your sourcing strategy should be that at any given point of time, you are able to source the products cheaper, faster, cleaner. It should be ethical. So these are the broad sourcing objectives. It should be cheaper. I should be able to get faster deliveries, and it should be clean. It should not come from dubious sources. It should not come from such companies which are non-compliant, which do not take care of the labor, which are of criminal sorts and things like that. You don't want to get into. You don't want to be seen as a company which is supporting such bad companies by placing orders with them. So yeah, it has to be cleaner. So these are the broad objective of sourcing. And how does sourcing help? Sourcing helps in enhancing customer service. You can give better varieties. You can deliver at, you can deliver faster because your sources can deliver faster to you. So because of sourcing, great sourcing, you will be able to enhance the customer service. You will be able to give better service to the customer, and by that you will be able to expand your sales revenue. Your sources your sources can, if they are able to deliver as and when you want, then you don't have to maintain so much of inventory. If they are reliable, consistent, and if they say that, so you place an order and within 6 hours I'll deliver to you, then you only have to keep inventory for 6 hours, not more than that. If someone says you place an order today, within a week's time I'll deliver the goods to you, then you only have to maintain inventory for a week's time. But if someone says I will be able to give the delivery only after 2 months, then in that case you will have to maintain inventory of at least 2 months. So if you have such sources which can deliver to you in 1 week's time instead of 1 month, you will now have to maintain inventory of just 1 week instead of 1 month. So your inventory cost is also going to come down by 1/4. And if the sourcing is great, you'll be able to improve your on-time delivery. If you are delivering, if you're making 80% on-time deliveries, because of great sourcing, you may be able to make 90% on-time deliveries, and that is a part of your performance. And then sourcing can help you to reduce the lead time. You've been buying a product with a lead time of 45 days. Every time you place an order, you get the raw material in 45 days. Now, if you get down to global sourcing, you will be able to find such people who may be able to give you the same product in 30 days. So if you can get the raw material in 30 days instead of 45 days, you will also be able to produce the goods in lesser amount of time, and therefore you will be able to reduce your lead time. So you will be able to deliver the goods in lesser number of days to your customers. That's what sourcing helps in. Go to slide number 14. Sourcing helps in reducing transportation cost. So if you were to buy from anywhere in the world, you can see the various options, and then you can see which particular country or region can give you such options where the transportation cost is the least, and accordingly you can buy from those regions. And sourcing also helps in building up supplier relationships. If you understand the philosophy of sourcing, the philosophy of sourcing is that you and your suppliers are a team together. Your success depends on the supplier's success, and if you are successful, the supplier will be getting more orders from you. So it's important that the supplier does things which will enable you, and if you are enabled, you will be able to give more orders to the supplier. So sourcing, in terms of its spirit, it helps in building up supplier relationship. If you have super great relationship with the supplier will do things faster for you, will do things first for you, will give you great quality, will do a lot of research and development and come up with new products, with better features and attributes, which you can use to make greater products and then offer it to the clients. So the supplier can help you with all those things. So sourcing helps in building up supplier relationships, and then of course it helps in the quality improvement. If you're sourcing from 3 factories, 2 factories are giving you great quality, and the third one is not. You can always tell the third factory that, listen, if you do not give me great quality, I'm going to stop buying from you and I'm going to look for another factory. So because you have 3 factories, 2 of them are doing good, third one is not, you can always warn the third one. If you are only buying from one factory, you cannot warn that factory, because if you warn them and they say that fine, we are not going to produce for you, what will you do? So sourcing also says that do not buy any product from one person, buy it from at least 2 to 3 persons, so that you are not dependent for any product on just one factory. So by virtue of this, sourcing helps in the quality improvement also. It helps in product expertise. Vendors, if you have a very good relationship with a particular vendor, and that particular vendor can make a particular raw material which no one else can, and you have a great relation with this vendor, and this vendor says, sir, I will give this rare product only to you, no one else, but the deal is that you give the orders only to me, not to anyone else. So this small simple relationship can make you look an expert in a particular product, because the raw material required for making that particular product, that raw material can be made only by one vendor, and that vendor is only supplying to you, no one else. So by virtue of this, sourcing can help in product expertise. And then of course sourcing teaches you, please develop your vendors. They are a part of your team. They are not your slaves. They are not your servants. Just because you are giving orders to them does not mean that they are one step below you, beneath you. They are your partners, and you should put in a lot of effort into developing the relationship and develop the vendors. So sourcing is by that virtue very, very important. We go to slide number 15, and we talk about the risks involved. Now, if you're buying from within India and if you're buying from the world, the risks are very, very different. The risks are in both the cases. If you buy from domestic markets, there are going to be risks, but you are going to have, you'll be facing higher risks if you are into global sourcing. Not that you should be scared of global sourcing, but you should know that global sourcing is neither smooth sailing nor is it similar to domestic sourcing. Global sourcing involves a significant degree of complexity in terms of communication, in terms of documentation, in terms of understanding the laws, just in case anything goes wrong, and the payment terms, everything is different. And global sourcing involves a significant degree of complexity over and above the standard business. So the amount of complexity that you see in India, when you're buying products, buying raw material from within India itself, so the amount of complexity that you handle over and above that, there's going to be further more degree of complexity in global sourcing. And of course, it will require a different set of skills and capabilities. If you're talking about global sourcing, you must know at least 3 to 4 languages if you really want to have an advantage. And you will have to face the problem that when you're sleeping, your vendors are awake, and when they are sleeping, you are awake. So how do you handle this time gap? So the language and the time gap are just a couple of examples there. There are so many other skills that you will require in terms of law, in terms of understanding the payment terms and things like that, the strategies of how to handle your the supplies and things like that, and then having an adequate knowledge of the custom duties on various kinds of raw materials, and how can you bring down the costs on your imports. Those are what adds to the degree of complexity in global sourcing in relation to the traditional sourcing that we do from within India itself. Go to slide number 16, and what we're going to talk about is the sourcing elements. Now, when you talk about sourcing, then the key parts of sourcing are men, materials, processes, infrastructure. Man is the labor, material is the raw material that we've talked about, processes are the methods of doing anything, method of supply, method of production, and the infrastructure. We will talk about them one by one in detail. So when we talk about men and when we talk about sourcing, then the men that we're talking about is not, it excludes the internal staff. The people who are working with you, exclude them. We're talking about that labor which is not under you, which is part of your vendor. So, your vendors could have great designers or consultants, or they could be buying and selling agents. These people could give you great service, great products, great varieties with great deliveries and prices. So that's when that is the manpower that we're talking about as an element of sourcing. Then we have materials, of course, the consumables, all the materials that you buy from outside, which is fibers, yarns, fabrics, and trims and accessories, including packing and packaging material. So we have men, we have materials. Now, we have an example for materials here in the next slide, slide number 18, which is, let's say, we're talking about sourcing of fabric. Now, how will we decide? How does our sourcing decision change as the fabric feature changes? So, if we talk about, let's say, the fabric type, if the fabric is natural or vegetable or animal, so animal is silk or wool. So wool comes from the mountains, and vegetable fabrics like linen and cotton, viscose, etc., they would come from farmlands like Andhra Pradesh and other states which grew cotton or linen. And the moment you say your fabric is synthetic, the synthetic fabrics are made from petroleum, like polyester and nylons. So synthetic fibers would come from primarily the western part of India, which is Gujarat. And if we talk about blends, which is a combination of two different types of fiber, it could be polyester nylon, it could be polyester cotton. So the blends would come from Mumbai and other states in the western part of India. And if we talk about width, a width of 60 inches and above comes from the mill. 44 inches come from the powerloom, and much smaller width would come from the handloom. The sources change because the moment you change the width, the source would change. Similarly, the count in construction. So the count is very coarse, the count is very low in case of handlooms, the count is a little higher in case of powerlooms, and it is the highest when the fabrics come from the mills. Same for the weights. The highest weight would come from the handlooms and the lowest weight would come from the mills because the fabrics are very, very fine. And if we talk about grey fabric, bleached fabric, dyed fabric, yarn dyed and printed. Now grey fabric is going to come from all those areas like all those areas which make fabrics, weave fabrics. But bleaching, dyeing, etc. would happen anywhere. So there's a fair amount of bleaching and dyeing happening in Delhi and NCR, in Mumbai, in Bengaluru and other places. So bleaching and dyeing happens pretty much in most of the hubs, apparel hubs in India. But if you say yarn dyed, then yarn dyed only comes from south of India, which is Erode, Salem and a couple of other places which specialize in yarn dyed fabrics. And if you talk about printed fabrics, so most of the apparel manufacturing and exporting hubs have such mills which can do printing. But if you talk about textured fabric, then there are companies in Delhi and in other parts of the country which specialize only in imparting textures or certain kind of finishes or certain kind of treatments to the fabric. So by the example that we have taken in this particular example of what we can see is that as the fabric feature changes, our sourcing decision would also change, because different sources can give you different features. One source cannot give you all types of features. That's not possible. So you should know that one should know that for what type of fabric which sources are available. And then we go to slide number 19, where we talk about the third and fourth sourcing element. Third is process and value addition, and fourth is infrastructure. Now, third, processes and value addition. If you see, weaving is done in Coimbatore or in Mumbai, but knitting happens in Delhi. Knitting primarily happens in Ludhiana. Knitting happens in Tirupur. So the weaving hubs are different and the knitting hubs are different. And if we talk about processing, treatments, washing for fiber, yarns, fabrics, and garments, then we have a host of other hubs which specialize in processing, treatments, etc. And if we talk about embroideries and value addition, so embroideries, let's say computer embroideries. Orient Craft happens to be the largest player in Asia with computer embroidery machines. That is based out of Gurgaon. If you talk about hand embroideries, then Bareilly happens to be the largest hub in India which is into hand embroidery. So right from Delhi NCR to Ghaziabad to Modinagar till Bareilly is the entire belt which specializes in handwork, hand embroidery, and beadwork, sequin work, and things like that. So as the process is changing, the entire sourcing region is changing, and as a garment professional, one should be aware of these places from where you can do your sourcing from. Now we come to the last element of sourcing, which is infrastructure. Now, infrastructure is the type of infrastructure which is required for all the other activities not covered by above. So we talked about the main materials, then we talked about processes and value additions, and all those activities which are not covered in the first three elements, those come under this particular section of infrastructure. And it is that infrastructure which is not under you, it is that infrastructure which belongs to your vendor. Now your vendors could give you the infrastructure related to storage. They could be giving you warehousing facility. They could give you the facility of checking, of cutting, sewing, finishing, checking, packing. You could be a person who just is great at getting the orders. And then you could get the order executed using your vendors. So, infrastructure is one of those elements which can be sourced, outsourced, like warehousing or checking, cutting, all the activities which are required to manufacture a garment and ship it. So, that is what comes under infrastructure. Now, with this, we come to the end of the first section of the session on sourcing for apparel exports, and in the second half, we're going to talk about the factors which affect sourcing decisions.